lesson 12. Ken, can you switch us over to the...
You got it.
I got it there?
You have the power.
To switch it? I got to be on a different switch to switch.
I'm sorry. I didn't notice I had done that.
I don't think he's actually there yet. No?
You had advanced it.
Yes, there we go. So, lesson 12, I was telling Dan as I was looking at this, I got this one because of what I get to do for a living. Spiritual nearsightedness kind of comes right along with physical nearsightedness and knowing what happens in it. So I get that one, But as I looked at it, I was telling Dan, it's like, well, it doesn't really feel like this one actually fits within the lesson of adding to your faith. But Dan's point is, well, this is the opposite of that. Right? This is what you do if you don't do it. And it's part of this is where it's come from. It's from the whole passage that we've been dealing with for this very reason, applying all diligence to your faith. This is the whole study, right? We're adding to our faith moral excellence, and in your moral excellence, knowledge, and your knowledge, self-control, and in your self-control, perseverance, and your perseverance, godliness, in your godliness, brotherly kindness, and in your brotherly kindness, love. For if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he who lacks these qualities is blind or short-sighted, having forgotten his purification from his former sins. So this is why this got in there. If you aren't doing these things, you're nearsighted, you're short-sighted. You're missing these things that you should be seeing. Nearsightedness has probably got to be why I do what I do. When I was 8 years old, I hit the baseball like crazy. 9 years old, couldn't hit the baseball anymore. Remember one time I'm standing out in right field for my 2 innings a game, and there must have been a ball hit to me.
And you wonder why your microphone's not out there.
What's that? Is it better now? And then the ball is hit, and I know it must be coming toward me because the second baseman is running right toward me. So I know, hey, it's got to be something's going on. And the ball lands right in front of me. Oh, there it is. And I pick it up and I throw it in. But I didn't know that ball was coming toward me until it bounced in front of me on the ground. Being short-sighted, being nearsightedness, I couldn't tell what was happening out there because my vision just wouldn't let that happen. Well, applying that same kind of an analogy to our spiritual faith, our vision is improved. Our life and our knowledge around us is improved by going through these things that we're being taught here in Peter. And when we miss those things, when we forget those things, when we're not paying attention to those things, we're going to miss this opportunity for what we are hearing about here. They will render us useless or unfruitful if we don't have these things increasing. So we don't want to be nearsighted in our life. We don't want to be missing these things because otherwise we're going to be useless. Who's that useless to? Useless to who?
God.
It's and everybody else. So we got, yes, God, we are to be useful in his kingdom, but that's for others as well. And so we're not only letting God down, we're letting our brothers and sisters down if we end up allowing ourselves to be useless and unfruitful. So instead of that, the author said, well, let's put that let's focus on that a little bit for short-sightedness. That's another eyeball thing. We'll focus on that for a little bit and talk about what is spiritual nearsightedness. I'm, just so you know, going to be out of town leaving Wednesday through Sunday, so I won't be, hopefully everything works right, I won't be out of town. We'll be out of town next Sunday, so I'm planning on just doing the whole lesson and questions today, and then Dan will take over next week with the final question or final lesson in this book. And then after that, I think he's going to do a couple of lessons on kanji on Sunday evening. A couple of 3 or 4. And then we have another book that we're going to go to and look into after that. So he who lacks these qualities. What are those qualities again? As we went through them, we are seeing that they lead us to be useful. In this example, this author shows us 3 different people who had these qualities, or at least seemed to, and then they lost some of those qualities. In one case, it was a physical sense, Esau. One is a spiritual sense, David, and Rehoboam with his pride on here. So let's go right to the questions. I'm going to start with the questions, and then we'll kind of work backwards and see where we come from there. What's the possible condition in question 1 of one who fails to grow and develop his faith? We've kind of just spoken about that, but if we fail to grow in increasing in these things, nearsightedness happens. But give me an example. What does nearsightedness mean to you? We've talked about it a little bit. Let me hear it from you guys. You're just scratching. Have you seen anybody in life do some short-sighted things? Do something that wasn't in their best interest because they were only seeing things up close when they weren't looking at the bigger picture and beyond that? Sam, have you seen something like that?
Pull the money out of your retirement account because you want to buy, you pick the flavor of the month.
Short-sightedness of looking at for the retirement, for the physical things of this world. Of, oh, I want to get a truck now, and I got this stuff in my retirement. Let me pull the money out, and I'll buy that fancy truck that I needed. And then you get to the retirement side, and you go, whoa, maybe I shouldn't have put that money into that truck, so maybe I should have spent that in a different way. Or there's a whole bunch of physical things like that. Should I have bought that house at that time? Those kinds of things. But you're kind of wrapped up in the short-term things of that. Somebody else have a thought on that? Go ahead, Doug.
Letting your anger
Letting your anger get the best of you and making a rash decision right in the moment instead of stepping back and saying, hey, there's a bigger picture out here of these other things, but instead I'm letting my anger change the choice that I would make. Okay, those are the kinds of things that I think we're talking about. The physical sense here of the retirement is a little different in that we're going to be seeing, I think it's talking about sin, and you can decide to pull money out or not, and it won't be a sin, right, to do that. But it's the concept of looking short term that Sam was bringing up, and I think we each need to be looking at that in the choices that we make in our lives. So what causes this spiritual nearsightedness or blindness? 2 Corinthians 4:4.
One other comment.
Yes.
Nearsightedness in this case works both directions. You don't think about the future. You think about now. So you're not thinking about your future life or your death or what might happen. But you're also forgetting behind you that your sins were forgiven.
Forgotten your former sin, yeah.
And so your nearsightedness goes both in the past and in the future. And so you're kind of locked into the present and, wow, why do I need to fix the leaky roof on a sunny day? So it's that kind of mentality where you're just in the moment and not thinking about consequences of future consequences or blessings or what have you've had in the past.
Good point. Because if we have forgotten our purification from our former sins, it's giving us that same problem that we're losing, we're not gaining from, we're becoming useless because we're not utilizing these things that God has pointed out that we should be increasing in. So 2 Corinthians 4:4, who's got that and able to read that for me? Go ahead, Cindy.
In whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them.
So who blinds us?
God of this world.
The God of this world. And now, when we sin, who does the Bible say, how does that start? Did God tempt us?
Satan.
So Satan may tempt us, but when we, I didn't write it down, but I'm going to go look it up. James chapter 1, where it's talking about when sin is conceived. And I wasn't going to bring them up, so I should have. When lust is conceived, in verse 15 of James chapter 1, lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. When lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. So we're enticed away by our own lust, our own desires for things. And the devil, he kept putting those desires in front of Jesus, right? So that's what the devil does. He tries to tempt you with things, but it's our own lusts that push us, that pull us in this direction. And so whatever that is, whatever we see that is tempting us, we can't say the devil made me do it, because it's our own desire. It's our own lack of making the right choices that are there. The devil's just trying to goad us in that direction. But he blinds the minds in this unbelieving world. Doesn't let them see what they could see. So this is where he is continuously trying to do. Hide the truth and get people to believe the lie. So in number 3, what are the 3 avenues which we get tempted with as humans? Go ahead, Tammy.
Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life.
And the boastful pride of life. Boastful's in there, but it seems like pride of life is one, but the boastful helps me remember what that means by the pride of life. Things that I could boast about. So these are the things that ensnare us. Something of one of those or all 3 of those will get us. Whether it's our pride or our lust after something, physical or something we could see. Yeah.
It's not mentioned in the lesson. He talks about how Jesus was tempted in all 3 of those ways at the end of the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, verse 6, you see Eve being approached in the same way, being shown the fruit. She saw that it was good for food, a delight to the eyes, and able to make one wise. And so there's the flesh, the eyes, and the pride of life. And she obviously succumbed.
Right.
To that.
And I bet Adam's thankful that he wasn't approached first on that, because the devil made it look good, right? He was just changing a few of the words that God had said and holding that out there, and Eve is saying, wow, that looks really good. I think I'd like some of that. And that is what the 3 avenues that Satan tempts us on: the physical, those things we can see, the things we want, and then the pride of life, this boastfulness of, well, I shouldn't have to do that. I'm not, why am I? This thing about I must be better than other people, so why should I have to put up with that? This kind of feeling that that leads people to make choices that shouldn't have made. So we then start looking at, the author does, of several people that have had these things put in front of them and how they've responded. And we're trying to learn from what the Bible teaches in each of those. And they're familiar stories to most of us, but let's go through them a little bit. Esau, who was Esau?
Son of Isaac.
Son of Isaac, brother of Jacob, the twin and older by just a little bit. And yet, so he had the birthright. That's the way that system worked. The firstborn son was the birthright son. And even though he was only that much farther ahead than his brother, he got the birthright. And yet, he didn't value that birthright in the same way that we are seeing later he should have done. I don't think Jacob or Esau was the only person to have ever done that. I'm sure there were people who, squandered. Well, we think in the New Testament of the prodigal son, who was given in this parable where he's given all of his inheritance early and he squanders it. So this is not a necessarily unusual thing, but it isn't something that we expect through when people are being taught about God and here's how you live your life. And But Esau instead takes this, instead of this opportunity, he squanders the opportunity. He sells his birthright. So let's go look at Genesis chapter 25. And there's several questions here that are in this, and so we're going to be reviewing them and at the same time that we're reviewing the story. So in questions 4, 5, and 6, 7. So in this passage, Jacob had cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field. Remind me, what was the dynamic that was going on here? Give me some background. Who remembers the story? Tammy?
Jacob liked to be around in the tent, and he was his mother's favorite. And Esau liked to be out in the field and doing things, and he was Isaac's favorite.
Right. And more of the hunter type, more of the I got to be out and doing things, and I'm not around the home fires like my younger brother who seems to have held in contempt a little bit, maybe, at least the picture that I get from that. So he comes in and, oh, you're cooking, yeah, give me some of that food. And Jacob seemed to be pretty shrewd. I wouldn't have thought to try to purchase a birthright, buy some stew, but he was able to, I'm not sure that this is necessarily a positive thing. Hey, why don't I try to trick my brother into giving me his birthright? I don't know that
It wasn't a trick. He was led away by his own desire.
He was, but why would Jacob have done that? You see what I'm saying? Why would...
His brother, he should have given him some soup.
He should have given him some soup, and he shouldn't have tried to get his own advantage over his brother by, in my view anyway, here, oh, you want this? Well, I'll make a deal for you. But it happened that way. And Esau could have chosen to not let his physical desires outweigh his common sense. I mean, common sense. This is your birthright. Double portion. You get to be the leader of the clan. All the promises come through you.
It is so short-sighted because I think he had to not value that birthright all along. Isaac was not a poor man. There were servants around. He could have said, fine, I'm not getting it from you, Jacob. The next servant, that walks by,
Right.
he could have asked him to bring him some food.
Right.
And it just seems that it didn't matter to him. I think he felt, getting into a further question, he felt he was a big, strong man, and I really don't need this birthright anyways.
So if he was coming in and he was having a heart attack and he needed the medicine to cure his whatever condition was, might have been worthwhile to sell his birthright for it, right? If he would have thought it through, there may be instances where it may have been worthwhile to trade the birthright. But in the short-sightedness view of what Esau's doing, I'm hungry right now, I've got this thing, it's not doing me any good. In the short term, this does nothing. What was the birthright? When was the birthright exercised?
The death of his father.
Well, generally it's the death of the father. Occasionally there were times where it could have been earlier, he could have gotten his inheritance early, but usually it's wait until dad's dead. And that's a long time down the road from what Esau is thinking, it appears. So he didn't value what this meant. We talked about that, we mentioned that he got a double portion as the firstborn. Everybody else gets a portion, he gets twice that. That's pretty significant if you had a pretty well-off father. But the other part to that is, who is going to come through the line of Abraham? Jesus is. And I don't know if God knew this all along, because we find out later or earlier that they knew that somebody knew, God knew, that the younger would serve or would be there through the lineage. But that's what should have happened, is that Esau should have been the direct descendant, and in some ways he was, because he was in Abraham's but he wasn't the direct one that Jesus came through, that the Christ came through. He was giving that up when he gave up this birthright for a bowl of porridge, for a bowl of stew. It says Esau despised his birthright, verse 34. So what does despised mean? That's the King James Version is despised.
So is
New American Standard says the same, yep.
to not value.
Not value. He didn't put the right value on it. Have you ever done anything like that in your life? I think we all, maybe we've despised a relationship, or we've not valued a relationship as much as we should have, and then we find out later, I wish I would have done that. Dick?
When I was a kid, I had a sister, 1 year younger. We were sitting in the back seat of the car, and folks had given each one of us a penny peppermint stick. Remember, we could get them for a penny. I don't remember.
$17 now.
And so I ate mine right down. And my sister was with us. And licking on hers. And I'm looking at that. I had a dime in my pocket. And I couldn't stand it. And so I gave her that dime for her stick. And that's the way it is. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing, but that's what it is.
You could have had 10 times that amount of candy by just spending the dime over at the store, but instead you wanted it right now. So that's a very good example of in our childish view of things. Go ahead, Sam or Tammy.
We all didn't value our soul. We sold it to Satan for a momentary pleasure that didn't give us the pleasure we really wanted anyways.
Perfect example, and that's one that I see every time we make a mistake, every time we lose focus on Christ and choose to do something that we shouldn't do, we're selling our birthright. We're selling, being short-sighted about what the benefit is for this, whatever it is that was there. And in Esau's case, it was for his physical, I am so famished, and this birthright's down the road, give me some food and I'll give you my birthright. So, so what he did is he sold his birthright for this short-term gain, question number 5. And number 6, what avenue of temptation did Satan, as we're looking at this in those 3 different ones, which was this one again? The 3 different avenues of temptation. This was the lust of the flesh. I physically need this. There are a lot of things in our world where if I don't do this, if I don't cheat and steal, I won't get any money. So therefore, I must do that. So otherwise, I'm going to starve. I'm going to not have a place to stay. I'm not going to be able to, So people will do things to take care of their own physical needs when they should be looking at a longer term. The more important thing is their spiritual need, not if this thing that's right in front of them, the candy. There's everything on the floor. So, what's the Christian's birthright? We kind of were talking about it. Go ahead, Cindy.
Son or daughter of God.
To be a son or daughter of God gives you what inheritance? An imperishable one. What else? So Cindy, you were going with that one further? Or?
I was just going to say it, but then they said it.
Okay. So, an imperishable inheritance, what is that inheritance? What do you get as in the birthright of Christ, or of God? Sam? Salvation. You get eternal life. Eternal is the key word that I was mentioning there. You get forever in the presence of God. How much is this short-term, whatever it is we see on the earth, worth in comparison to eternal life with God in heaven? I mean, if you actually would sit down and think about that, would we ever do anything stupid enough to sin? If we actually would be sitting and looking, wait a minute, I'm trading That, for this, it's not even close if we will sit back and consider it. And that's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to make sure we consider these things. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, and it feels like that is a function of perspective, for lack of a better word. When I was a kid, the idea of waiting a month for Christmas, my birthday, to whatever, put off for a purchase or something, seems like an eternity. I don't have a grasp of eternity. I don't have a grasp of consequences. I don't, and the similar thing as an adolescent. Oh, I can't date that girl. Why? No. And yet, as a older person, suddenly I say, yeah, okay, I can see a 15-year mortgage as opposed to a 30-year mortgage. I'm beginning to get some perspective. I gotta wait till I get even older before I'm really going to even get this, the tiniest of a glimmer of what eternity is, it feels like.
It's a hard one.
It seems to be speeding up. Maybe that's just because eternity's getting a little closer.
Because your perspective has changed on that. Yep. Good. So, when we are being confronted by something that somebody's put right in front of us, hey, do you want to buy this thing? Do you want to, go in on this with me and we'll do this? Hey, do you want to help me? We're going to go in and do this. We're going to steal this. We're going to, we'll take them to the cleaners. And you got to step back and say, wait a minute, is that, whatever that is, worth it in comparison? Doug?
I think a lot of times, we think about the sacrifice of Jesus Christ in a clinical sense, and it's hard to imagine what he went through. Not only the physical harm that he went through, the humiliation, but we don't have the concept, the grasp of what is it really to be separated from God. And that's, I think for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine what that is.
Even though we've been there,
Right.
we just didn't know it
Correct.
because we were short-sighted. We couldn't see where we were at that time. So
It's hard to put a value on something like that.
yeah, I agree. Jesus could see it because he had already been there and he emptied himself, and so he knew what he was giving up. We can't fully and maybe understand that. Tim?
I sometimes wonder if some of that teenage angst that we see with teenagers is that time in their life when they're becoming separated from God, and that they don't recognize it, but as we're watching this external thing they're going, that watching this struggle with life that they're going through, I sometimes wonder if that is the starting of that separation from God, from that innocence of a child.
It could be. And I also think that as kids, we don't really, it's that, we almost moved, when my parents were going through problems, we almost moved to another state when I was a junior in high school. And, oh, wait a minute, I've got football team and I have a girlfriend here and oh, it would just be terrible. And it, looking back at it now, no, it wouldn't have. I would have been fine, and it was fine to end up staying. But it just seemed like such a huge thing that if that would have happened right in the middle of going through, and it wasn't. The perspective was different, and I just couldn't see past that. Henry?
Yeah, I don't think we realize the separation when we're not one of God's children. Because, listen, when you're out there in the world, you're not paying attention to, do I have God or not?
Right.
Or is God with me or not?
Right.
So, when you are in Christ and you are His children, you have a God with you, and you can tell that you have God because the things that God provides for you that you never had before.
Right.
And so when you don't have it, something happens. Something happened. I lost God somewhere along the line.
You could feel that difference.
What have I done? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
As we went back to the 2 Corinthians, when the God of this world blinded the minds of the unbelieving. They don't know
Right.
that they're missing that in many cases, right? And maybe we do that to ourselves as we're trying to figure things out at the front side, as we're kind of losing our innocence. So the second group, or second example that this author uses to illustrate this short-sightedness was David. In question 8, what avenue of temptation did Satan use to get David to sin with Bathsheba?
Lust of the eyes.
Lust of the eyes. He saw this person, and we're in 2 Samuel now, chapter 11. And now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. There are happenstances. If David would not have seen it, he trips, bumps his toe, and has to go do something and doesn't look out the window at that time. Or was walking around on there and somebody else happens to be up in the palace and he starts talking to his buddy over here and just misses. But those times, this happened, so David had an opportunity for that. Point I'm going to here, or trying to get to here slowly, is that there has to be an opportunity for us, for the lust of the eyes to take effect. And we can control our environment to some degree to whether or not this lust of the eye is out there. And we can't completely control the world, but we can stop ourselves from being in situations or watching certain things on TV or on the internet, keeping us out of those situations where our eyes just don't see those things will keep us from being. Now, we can go find it. We can, there's all kinds of people who are finding all kinds of things to fix their eyes on. But as Christians, we have a choice, at least in some degree. There are places that we don't, right? There can be things that are that come in front of us that we have no control over, like Bathsheba on this rooftop over there. David didn't plan that, it appears. He didn't know she was going to be out. He didn't plan to be out there and see if she was going to be there today. It just happened. But we have choices in most cases. So the lust of the eyes then, in question 9 here, identify some of the things that caused this foolish young man to, it's not this foolish young man that is talking about. He switched examples here. But in David's case, here's Bathsheba. Remind me again, did David already have other wives?
Yes.
Did he need another person in his life? Is there something that was missing? Had God not blessed him in some way? This is what surprises me when I see people do some of these things, that whether it's stealing or whether it's getting involved in some just extramarital affairs or other things like that. What in their life was so terrible that they had to go outside of what was already a good thing in order to get something else? And David had already a life that most people will never have, as far as not only from just his relationship with God, but his physical, few people on the earth have had the abilities and riches and wives that he had.
And the trials he had gone through to get them, which should have, caused those things to be so valuable. And, he'd been given a wife by Saul that eventually kept her as a wife, but didn't see because she didn't value him. But, he proposed to Abigail, was somebody he saw with a great deal of sense and somebody to really build you up. So he'd been through these things to see their value and still failed here.
Yep. So, were there any other beautiful women in Israel, do you think? Or was this the only beautiful woman? Just happened this beautiful woman was married to somebody else, right? David, it was the king. He could have multiple wives. He shouldn't have. expanded them. I mean, there was rules, or God's thing that they shouldn't do that. Shouldn't have multiple wives or many wives. I can't remember the exact saying that he used, but
Well, he had 6 already.
at that point.
Yeah.
But he didn't have hundreds like Solomon had, but he could have had another one. He could have had another wife if he would have found somebody who was beautiful and he wished, that could have worked. But instead he went after the person that he couldn't have. Go ahead.
Yeah, it all went wrong for him when she became pregnant, because he could handle everything up to then. But then he had to scheme on how to bring her husband home and make it look like it was his, and on and on and on and on it went. To where he dug a deep hole that he couldn't get out of.
And he, I mean, the front side of that was his relationship with God, right? So it wasn't a minimal thing, but it just wasn't quite as bad as when you're plotting her husband's murder after that, right? Go ahead.
Especially since her husband was one of his mighty men. I mean, it was not just somebody he didn't know. He depended on this guy for several different things.
A betrayal in an even higher sense, in this person who has looked out for you and risked his life for you, and you go and sleep with his wife and then try to come up with a way to cover your tracks by removing him from the situation. Terrible thing.
David had all the power that there was to do that, and he used it.
And he used it for the things, this lust of the eye, this putting himself in a situation where, as Roger's pointing out, one thing after another. He didn't plan, it doesn't appear, for the second and third and fourth thing to happen, but because he got himself in that situation. So that's a word to us.
Yes.
When we see those situations, we shouldn't just go, well, it's not that bad. I'm only doing this one thing. Because it's the next and the thing you do to cover it up and the thing after that that will get you in beyond where you can get back out again.
Or when we are in power, when we're in a position to have power over someone, we don't just take what we want because we have the power to do so. And we have to think about things like that,
Yeah.
and not let ourselves get to the point where we're abusing other folks to please our own selves through our power that we have.
Yep, I agree. Then the author then turns to Proverbs, the 7th chapter, where he describes the young man who runs after the harlot. And this description goes through a whole bunch of the lusts of the eye and of the flesh that people get drawn into. She catches his attention in verse 11 of Proverbs 7 with her boisterous and rebellious spirit. She's out and about and seizes him and kisses him. And with a brazen face, she says, I was due to offer peace offerings, but today I've paid my vows. Therefore, I've come out to meet you. So she's flattering him with, I just came to see you. These kinds of things will lead where we don't want to go. In this case, for this person, it leads him down into a road of infidelity. It leads him to harlotry. So if he had run in the first meeting with this woman who happens to just bump into him, he would have been better off. And so as we are seeing ourselves, now this is talking about, our physical and sexual interactions in this world, but apply that to your spiritual. There are things in life that are just trying to lure you in. Come on in. You are such a great person. If you just come on over here to me, and those words that entice, that's where we need to stop, hear that and say, whoa, that's something I got to step back from, because we need to not get drawn in by this pride that she was going toward. Oh, you're such a handsome and rugged person. I came out just to see you tonight. Tammy?
It also seems in that situation, I mean, I know it's a story,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem random.
Mhm.
It seems like this is a way he's gone before. He's probably seen her before. Maybe he's tarrying, going a little slower so he can see her, and he's just setting himself up.
Verse 8 says, passing through the street near her corner, he takes the way to her house in the twilight, in the evening. I just happen to be strolling over this way, and that's exactly, it seems to be what he's pointing out, putting himself in the situation. Then she sees him and then starts the process, and then in verse 22, what happens? Verse 22's got that right there. What was that? An arrow gets him. This one, that was his 23, yes. Suddenly, the arrow is the second part of that I was going toward. And as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as one in the fetters to the discipline of a fool, until the arrow pierces through his liver, as a bird hastens to the snare. I mean, that's a whole bunch of not good things that we want right there, because he allowed himself to get in that situation. Just kind of wanted to go by that corner and just see, and then he listens to those words, and now apply that to yourself in each of those situations that we get in front of. Whether it's the guy with the deal on the I had some friends from my that I knew from our office that this guy had come in with cattle futures for their retirement at the shipyard. If you buy these cattle, this $10,000 per share, you'll get a portion of a limited partnership in this cattle ranch. And then you can write off, essentially, not essentially, you can write off the whole $10,000 as a write-off. You'll save that money in your taxes, and then you'll be getting more and more income, and it'll be great, it'll be wonderful. Wow, that sounds too good to be true. Well, the guy was taking the money and then not paying the taxes that he was owed on the thing. He kept promising more and more returns, and ended up that everybody that had invested that ended up many thousands of dollars on it. It was too good to be true. And my friend who was doing this was saying it sounded like too good to be true, and she could have, if she'd have stepped back, her life would have been much better off. But she went forward on that, and this is where we need to step back. Go ahead, Russia.
There's a whole generation in the 60s who did exactly what you were talking about. It was called to be in these groups that would just, free love, make love, all that stuff, and Woodstock and all of that became the light that people were looking at. And look what that did to that generation and what it's doing now.
Has it really helped them? Have all those people who threw off all those bonds that they threw off, and did it help them? Doesn't look like it. So the third one, go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to say, though, if you read, I know that we read 6, where at the window of my house I looked out from my lattice. But she also makes a point, and I have seen among the simple, and I have perceived among the youth, a young man lacking sense. So, and then he's passing along the street near her corner. I think that goes to, I was kind of thinking about like the nearsightedness, not having enough knowledge to keep in the strength to stay on the right path.
To see what's going to happen if I go down that road. He lacked the sense to figure that out, right? And he lacked the vision to see what would happen next. The third one that our author brings up is Rehoboam, and I had to go back and review Rehoboam again because I don't read a lot about Rehoboam over and over again. But Rehoboam took the throne when Solomon died. He was the one that Solomon appointed or said was going to take over after he died. And Solomon had been very strict in his taxes and in his tribute, and because he was getting the temple built, and he had all these other things going on, and some of the folks, it appears, felt like that was a big burden on top of them. They were doing it, but they do it for Solomon. And then Rehoboam takes over, and there's this question: should we do the same? Should you do it the same level? Or please give us some relief here. We did it for your father, but give us some relief. And Rehoboam had two groups of people. Who did he talk to?
Well, it sounds like some of them
Solomon, his father's advisors, the elders on there. And then the second group was?
Young men that he grew up with.
Young men that he grew up with, the youth, and
His buddies.
his buddies. That's the two groups that he was looking at. Now, we can see this because we know the outcomes, but I've been in situations like that too, where I'm trying to understand what to do, and there's two groups of people to look at. And what I end up usually doing, I think, is siding with the person who does more what I wanted to do in the first place. Sometimes that's where it seemed to go. In Rehoboam's case, he had a choice. He could have said, all right, let's back up a bit, but instead he said, no, I'm going to go with my buddies. More tribute, and my father, you thought it was that he was tough. Wait till you see what I do, right? He took that whole different thing. And in this case, the author's pointing out, that's the boastful pride of life. I'm as good as he was. What do you mean not good? I'm going to be twice as good. And that boastful pride of life led him to his downfall. What did he lose in this bargain? 10 tribes.
83% of his kingdom.
83%, plus or minus 0.5%. We got the Levites in there somewhere.
I mean, you can just see this spoiled young man who has never worked in his life, and his buddies who are also probably all nobles and haven't had anything, telling a bunch of people who are asked if they're going to get some relief. You think you're going to get relief from me? And then this total shock on him, like, what do you mean you're leaving?
Right.
Why wouldn't you want to pay me more taxes?
I couldn't see that one coming. Right. So these three examples are trying to point out to us today. These were all many years ago. Every one of these, right? Thousands of years ago. And yet we will be faced with these kinds of choices within the next month. Within the next month, when one of these things hits you, and you step back and you say, ooh, I could have reacted this way in anger, or I could have made this choice, it looked too good to be true, or I saw that thing that was just whatever that was out there, the Seahawks tickets, and I could have just skipped church and gone to the Seahawks game. Whatever those things are, in the next month, remind yourself of this lesson and say, I was being prepared for this situation, and then let me know later on what it was. If you can do it without, causing yourself any grief. All right. So Jesus was the answer to each of these things, by the way. That the author points out that Jesus went through each of these things, and yet he could do it. It's not impossible, and that's the last thing he points out, is that each of these things are difficult to overcome, but Jesus shows us that we can overcome them. So when those things happen, we shouldn't give up hope. We shouldn't just say, why am I here anyway? I'll just go ahead and do that. Jesus can get us through that. There's no temptation except that God would provide a way of escape. So we have the ability to go beyond that. So the spiritual nearsightedness, at first I didn't see how it was going to fit in, and now I do, from looking at these things and trying to put that into my own life. I hope you'll do the same. Next week, Dan will have the class. And at this point,